That's,
Right.
yeah, that's part of it.
It is 10 o'clock, and we will call the Kerrville City Council workshop to order. At this time, we have public comments. Shelley, do you want to read in our information there, please?
Yes, ma'am. A member of the public may address City Council regarding an item on this agenda. Comments must be relevant to the agenda item. This is not intended to be a question and answer session. Prior to speaking, each speaker must fill out the speaker request form and submit it to the city secretary. The speaker request form must be submitted before the meeting is called to order, and each speaker is limited to 4 minutes. We do have one citizen speaker signed up.
All right.
George Baruti.
Mr. Purdy, good morning.
Morning. I don't know that it matters in this one. George Broody, 1616 Glen Road. Anyways, so you're here to talk about the budget, the general fund in particular. So I would like to urge you to consider reporting differently on your maintenance costs for streets or really any infrastructure, in a hope to avoid the situation that we ran into with the public safety building, which is we never booked the maintenance costs that were incurring over the years because we normally just put them in when you pay for them. But the expense is really being incurred when it wears out. So in streets in particular, the city has in their hands the Fugger report from 2019. And it puts in there a statement, the budget required to maintain the city's current network PCI of 69 was determined to be approximately $4.25 million annually. This budget results in an almost constant PCI over 10 years. In other words, they're saying in their expert analysis that it takes $4.25 million to actually maintain our streets, not to improve them and not to let them deteriorate. So what we do in our budget is we put in, under the streets program department, you have a line item streets, which represents your paving. And we put in what we wish to pay instead of what we actually are incurring. So this past year, I think you put in a little over $2 million. Based on the Fugro report and the expected increases that Fugro suggested, you should have been putting in close to $5 million as expenses incurred. That line item is not what you're paying. It's basically the cost of the wear and tear that occurred during that year. So that's your expense. So what we should be putting in there is something close to $5 million. Then whatever revenue you have applied to it would show up, and everybody would know that down the road, we don't have this big, massive amount of street repairs that we've been deferring, because that's really what we're doing right now. Every time we put in $2 million, and well, on top of that, you actually are deferring more expense because you budgeted last year $2 million. I don't know what I haven't seen the numbers. I don't know what you actually paid, but the prior 3 years, we budgeted, well, all the way back to 2019, we budgeted $1.7 million and we spent $1.23. In 2020, we budgeted $1.8 million and we spent $800,000. So these are all expenses that are really just being deferred. They're not being represented in the budget anywhere. So 5 years from now, you're going to end up looking at a street program that's going to need to be repaired, and it's going to be an enormous number. My suggestion is to start representing it in your budget properly and get that out there so we can deal with the problem today instead of in the future. And it was asked when I met with the city, what would be my solution? Because there's no way you're going to have $5 million in your budget. And you have three options. You can either continue to defer the expense, which I would not suggest you keep doing. You can raise taxes, which is a scary thought for $3 million. Or you can look at, and it's been considered by council before, look at other methods that are cheaper and actually more long-term to utilize maintaining the streets. So that's pretty much all I had. I had one other thing, if I could. It's just, yeah, okay, I don't need that long. In the engineering services department, you have a line item in there for EIC admin service fee. I submit to you that EIC has absolutely no engineering needs in its administration. Any engineering is done from EIC's standpoint at the project level and would be paid by project funding. I would suggest that that's a overcharge to EIC for a fee they don't actually receive. That's all. Thanks.
I didn't have the report in front of me, but my understanding was that we needed to continue to raise it, but not to the tune of $5 million. Am I mistaken on that?
We could talk about it a little bit later. We
I
do
was
have a
gonna say.
slide on street maintenance.
Okay.
I think the disconnect really is that there was a portion of the existing pavement management plan that does talk about ongoing maintenance costs when you are looking at a combination of both maintenance and reconstruction.
Okay.
As you recall,
We
this
used
council
$10
made,
million.
yeah, exactly, made a significant
So
reinvestment on the reconstruction
so that's
portion.
not being
And so
accounted
that
for
has
in
helped
that number.
reduce down and bring down our maintenance
Right,
costs
okay.
on an annual basis.
Okay.
But it is something that we have to continue to look at,
Why-
and we have expended those funds, and so,
I mean, I do want it to be, did he leave? I do want it to be accurate. I mean, but I just remember looking at that report and that it wasn't to the tune, I never saw $5 million in that cost, did I?
There was a higher proposed annual cost if the city was not going to
Gotcha.
invest capital dollars towards reconstruction
Gotcha.
efforts. Because every annual allocation
That's what I was
would need
thinking.
dollars for real. Yeah.
That didn't take into account the $10 million
That's correct.
money.
Yeah, yeah.
And then on the other side of the street maintenance issue, the money that's not spent is not reallocated. It continues to be carried in.
That's right.
It's just if the timing is off between one and the other, we don't lump it back into the general fund and reuse it. We're still using it for the same intended purpose.
That's right.
And not reallocating it.
Right.
That's right.
It's just a timing as far as when the actual construction gets done.
Right, and we bring that to you as part of the budget amendment to say, we didn't spend X, or
Well, I
we're
wish Mr.
asking
Grudy
to
was here so that
to
to
transfer it over.
clarify that for him. but-
Well, we'll have an opportunity certainly to clarify for the public on what our street maintenance funding has been in the past.
Yeah.
And this council has been very aggressive in increasing street maintenance funding.
Exactly, that's why I don't wanna be,
50% over the last
Right.
several years, as well as dedicating debt dollars towards
Right.
reconstruction efforts. And we are proposing, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but we are proposing for a reassessment this year of the street conditions.
Perhaps you should
so
say
we can see where
previous
we're at.
councils have been aggressive.
Previous
because This
councils.
council has not.
The last few years have been very aggressive.
Thank you.
so, since this is recorded and since the speaker isn't here, I do think that, I'll speak for myself and perhaps, that it is important and that there is no intent to defer or to hide numbers or to reallocate those funds. That if I thought that the city was trying to do something like that, then I'm sitting here as a council member to call you out on that. But I have made it a priority, as I know other members have in the past, to really increase the street maintenance budget and to issue $10 million in debt service to take care of some big projects. So I just wanted to have that on the record.
Absolutely.
And what we could do is make sure that George is notified when we're talking about that and possibly could be here to maybe get a little more information.
Sure.
And transparency will absolutely be at the top of the list, so. All right, thank you. All right, who's first?
I will open up, Mayor. Just kind of zooming out a little bit from where we started this morning. We're here this morning to talk about your general fund operational budget for fiscal year 23. And before I hand it over to Julie, just a little bit reminder in regards to our process. This is a very high-level discussion today. We'll talk about really touch points that we're sensing with our general economy, some of the macro-level national elements that are certainly affecting what we're feeling here locally, and then certainly how it's affecting our operations. As we will reiterate throughout this, we are a people-based business. We are out there providing service for our citizens, and so it's very much a people-based personnel business. However, we are very much feeling cost pressures in regards to the inflationary elements, particularly based around petroleum. And with fuel prices rising, almost every one of our businesses is a high user of fuel sources, and so that is affecting. So what you will see today is very much a budget that has it's a hold the line budget. It is a budget of what would our direction to our staffs was. You tell us what you need to do to maintain the service level that you are providing right now, given all of the cost pressures that we are seeing just across the marketplace. And so they have done a tremendous amount of work over really the last 9 months, because we start, particularly with the bigger departments, almost as soon as we begin the fiscal year. But definitely as we've entered into 2022, they have done a tremendous job in really cutting everything that they can to be able to accommodate our basic operations and the cost increases that we have seen, and I think have brought a very lean budget to you all to be able to react to this morning.
And hold the line doesn't mean that things aren't gonna cost more, just.
That's
I
right.
mean, as you were saying,
That's
it's exactly
right.
what you're, just to reiterate, hold the line doesn't mean hold the number, cause
No.
the number.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
then you go.
Only goes
Unfortunately, we
up.
don't have an effect on that.
Holding
piece
the
of it.
line.
That's right. Hold the service line, I guess
Hold the
is what I
service
should
line,
say.
yeah, right, well, right, just.
When you say people-based business, are you talking about the city's employees or the city's customers?
Both. Both.
See, that wasn't clear.
Yeah, we're a people-based business in that we're in the service industry. We don't make widgets. We make service. And you know, our primary drivers, we'll talk about that later. We're very much, particularly in the general fund, a public safety agency, right? Those are the biggest drivers of our funding in the general fund. Parks is obviously also a huge piece, and then planning and development services is also a major portion of general fund. So those are our big drivers there. Water fund obviously is an enterprise fund on the public works component, but those are we very much
Service and safety.
We're service and safety. That's right.
Exactly right.
So with that, I'll throw it over to Miss Julie Behrens
All right,
and her
Ju-
team.
Julie, as we go through this, I would assume you would like questions
Sure.
as they come up, don't wait till the end.
Right.
And you guys don't have to ask for permission to ask questions, just go ahead.
And if you ask something that's coming up, then I'll let you know that's coming
That
up
is
here in a
coming
minute.
up. That-
I've
that
tried to
would be
cover what
fine.
I think might be
Okay.
questions, but I never know, so.
All right. Good
Um,
morning to the rest of the staff. We're glad you guys are all here listening, so.
Morning.
All right, Julie, take
So
it
to
away.
let you know, I don't have control over the slides because of where I'm sitting, so Jacob is, so if we're talking to each other, Jacob's changing slides for me back there, so,
Y'all have a signal.
Hand signals, yeah.
yeah, just like, take it away, Jacob. Okay, so the first slide here is just kind of letting you know what our agenda is today, just reviewing the calendar and the process that we have going forward from here until we actually file the proposed budget. A little bit of look at 22 as we go through slides. There's some comparison stuff so you can kind of see where we're lining up now, where we think we might be going in some areas. Little deeper look at property tax and sales tax. Those are, you know, obviously our bigger revenues in the general fund. Some expense information, streets and cybersecurity are two of the big things that we'll touch on. And then a little more in-depth conversation about asset replacement. So again, as we go through, just stop me. If it's something I'm going to talk about that I haven't yet, then I'll tell you that. Otherwise, that's what this is for, is so we have a discussion and we'll take some good feedback from you guys. So just letting you know where we are on the calendar. So today is our first budget workshop, and we'll be talking about general fund with a little bit of mix in with asset replacement, which technically is general fund for financial reporting reasons. We'll be meeting about water and then CIP and other. So if we touch on some CIP things, we're not giving a lot of detail today because that's coming up in the next budget workshop where we're talking specifically about CIP.
Community Improvement
Sorry.
Program. Yeah, we'll try to.
We'll try it.
We'll be on acronym
not
watch
capital
today.
It's not capital,
I
it's
thought it was
community.
capital.
Community investment program.
projects.
Yeah,
Community
a lot
investment.
of them. A lot of them
Plan.
are capital improvements, but not all. Some are.
Community investment.
Why is that broken out? Is that
Program?
its own fund?
It is,
We actually have two funds, so one water and one general.
and we transfer to those in a very similar way to
Community
the
investment
program.
Plan.
plan,
Program.
plan, program.
Yeah, CIP in our world, so you have to remember
I
that.
thought I'm glad y'all asked, because I thought
Yeah.
that was capital improvement.
Yeah. Now, for financial reporting, they do come together with the fund that they're assigned to. So like general fund, capital improvement projects those go into general fund for financial reporting. But this breaks it out for transparency, so you can really see how those dollars are being spent.
Okay.
And those are typically larger one-time purchases,
Mm-hmm.
and so we pull those out of the operational funds, because
Okay.
otherwise you'd see wide swings.
Okay, so that's
But
kind
it's-
of the purpose?
Yes,
correct.
same with
Okay,
asset
okay.
replacement.
But it's
Okay.
not always necessarily a capital.
Gotcha.
So when we
Right.
see our CIP report, is that our community improvement plan now?
No, no,
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what it's been. It's just, we refer to it as CIP, so I have to
It's
remember
always
acronyms.
been that? It's never been capital
It's
improvement?
changed over the last couple
Yeah.
of years, several
well.
times.
Yeah.
You learn
Last
something
four or
new
five
every
years,
day.
it's
I
been
can
hard for me to
assure,
keep
I can
up
assure
with.
you it was once.
Let's call that.
Yeah.
But that was before most of y'all were.
Well, because really, if you think about transfers in and out, if we transfer from the general fund to either general
Transfers
fund.
is always the thing that confuses me.
Well, if you transfer from general fund to either asset replacement or to CIP, it's essentially at the end of the year still general fund dollars. It's just how they're allocated for transparency because it has to be balanced, so. Okay. Okay, so there's your calendar. You guys know what's coming up on that, but just to keep you in line,
On the tax roll, is it, you
So-
think you'll have a good estimate by the 25th?
we will have something from them by the 25th. There's a large number of protests, so we don't know. They have to be 95% to give
Before
us a
they certify?
certified roll.
So when do they have a deadline?
25th of July. So that gives us like 4 days to make adjustments to the budget.
And again, as we
But-
reiterated, that 25th, in years, 2 years back, when we had a high number of protests, they actually did not make that deadline.
Right.
And we only got an estimate,
Yeah.
and so it actually compounded. We have several more days before we actually receive the certified.
When was the deadline for protests?
Oh,
It's a while
it's
ago.
a while ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Back in April or
Like
May. I
April,
think.
May.
we've
April,
got a
early May.
solid number of how many protests are out there.
Oh, yeah.
CARCAD does, yes, and they're working through those.
Okay.
So, we'll get into that a little bit deeper as we go, so.
So I think I have this slide. Julie assigned me some slides every now and then so she could catch her breath. Just wanted to provide a little bit of the macro landscape. Obviously, this is the national inflation comparison that we've seen on a quarterly basis. I think it's important for us to remember that this basket of goods is not necessarily the basket of goods that the city is purchasing. So, for instance, this is really TPI based off of milk and fuel and cereal and the things that a typical household. It's not concrete and gasoline and rebar and wastewater chemicals and the things that a city is purchasing, which I can assure you have been even higher than what these are. And we'd be happy to get you guys some statistics on that. But all that being said, we are seeing these influences, as I mentioned before, within our day-to-day operations and the way that we do business. Fuel costs continuing to escalate, and that also has an effect certainly on many of our supply components that we have. The labor market, again, we are in the people business, and so certainly our employees are feeling the inflationary elements within their own households. Supply chain issues continue to be a problem for us, affecting not only the things that we order, but the things that our contractors are ordering, and so we are seeing higher contract prices as well. Just in regards to the labor that we do outsource. Fed has imposed 2 rate increases thus far, and then, as you probably heard in the news just this week, we saw a 75 basis point increase. So we were hoping with that downtick in April of
Yeah.
the 8.3 that we would
would start
see a
going
downward
down.
slide, and then we saw 8.6. So
Question
determined.
then, what presumptions are you making on fuel costs and things like that, since this comparison isn't directly,
Yeah,
like,
we'll
are
talk
you?
about that a lot, and
are
I'm gonna
you,
show you
okay.
some where we are and where we think we're gonna be. Yeah.
And it's evolving. We
Right.
just even just this week adjusted it
change.
again because unfortunately we weren't seeing the downward pressures that we were hoping to at this point. So
I just want a year over year where we can just make a comparison and like, there's not a pandemic, there's not an ice storm.
Trust us, so do we.
there's average waterfall.
Yeah, yeah.
We can go back to
There's not
2017. I think.
yeah,
8.6% inflation.
unfortunately the new normal is that there is no.
Yeah, it's hard to compare.
It is. Okay, so we looked at these things in retreat, but just wanted to reiterate a few of the structural and accounting modifications that we've made. We'll begin with 23 budget. So we've merged golf into the general fund, and we talked a little bit about why. Operationally, that merger really occurred back in 2021. We just didn't merge it on the accounting side. So they have been a division of the Parks Department. This will be going into the third year, so it's a strong performer, but it really just doesn't align from an accounting standpoint of accounting for the shared resources that we're using. So they're sharing people, they're sharing materials, they're sharing equipment, so it just makes sense, because they really are a quality of life
Especially
division
now
over there.
that they're doing so much,
Right.
much better.
I mean, it's really going well over there, and they do have an overlap of expertise within those divisions, and so they're sharing that knowledge, across the parks departments, and so from an accounting standpoint, that makes sense.
Yeah, overall, making that division more efficient as well as the department.
We did make a few changes, and you'll see this just outlined in the budget book. There's no financial impact to these changes, but we did combine the fire and EMS departments into one division instead of two divisions, because for the same reason, some of our firefighters are working EMS and vice versa, and so there really wasn't a lot of consistency with how expenses were being accounted for there. Breaking out the Office of Innovation and Economic Development from the admin umbrella, really to kind of show what they're doing from a functional standpoint. And again, there's not a financial impact, it's just really to be more transparent about how we're allocating resources and how those are being spent. So do you have anything on those two, economic or
No,
office?
again, just the ability to add some transparency to the budget and give you guys an idea of what resources are being dedicated to what functional areas.
Okay, so we'll look at revenues, and this is just kind of a high-level look at proposed revenues. So this is what we've projected. Right now, we're estimating that sales tax will be 30% of the fiscal year 23 budget. In fiscal year 22, it was at 27.8% of the budget. Property tax obviously coming down a little bit because of that. It was 35% in 22, 32% in 23, and keep in mind, these are early estimates, so these numbers could change. You know, there's always a risk, obviously, to leaning on sales tax that heavily, but we'll talk through why we feel pretty comfortable with where we're sitting. Services here include primarily solid waste and EMS. There are a few other little pieces in there.
Are you gonna go over that in more detail? Cause okay.
Yeah, a lot more detail
I was
on
gonna
those
say, 'cause that
two,
one was
those two
confusing.
large revenues we're gonna talk about in pretty good detail. Recreation revenues do include Kerrville Shriner Park, golf, aquatics, any parks fee-based programs, and then also Kerrville Sports Complex fees that they charge. Transfers include street use fee and an admin cost that come in from the water fund, and then also some hot money that comes in for tourism support. And then,
Are we gonna look at, we're not looking at any fee schedules today, are we?
so you have a draft of a fee schedule at your place. The only thing it doesn't include is water, and that's because we're not there yet.
Oh, okay.
We wanted to give that to you today. We won't have to
Okay.
go over it, but I wanted to give it to you in
Okay.
advance so that you guys have time to comb through it. And that way, if you have
Cool.
questions or, you know, find a typo, which is possible, we can get those corrected
Thank you.
before they go out. So we'll talk about those more at the next meeting, or if
Okay.
you have questions between now and then.
Okay.
Just overall on this slide, I think it's important to know, Julie mentioned some of the shifts there, but given, you know, council's decision over time to reduce the property tax rate, in fact, it's been reduced the last 4 out of 5 years, you've seen these percentages shift in that we are more reliant now on sales tax to be able to provide our services. And so in doing that, and that's okay, but we just have to be mindful of that balance and also recognize the volatility of some of those sources versus other sources. And so particularly given the national volatility that we've seen at the national level, it just always gives us a little bit of pause as we try to forecast what's gonna happen over the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months.
Right.
So we'll dive into property tax a little bit more in detail here, and we don't have to go through all of this. I know we touched on this at council retreat as well, but I do think it's important to remember that because of the bond election and that approved debt, that the state has that 3.5% over new revenue that we have to stay within before we have to go to an election for our property tax rate. That's only gonna apply to the M&O portion because of the debt service that's been approved. So that's kind of the main takeaway from here. But this just kind of outline, you know, how you get to the no new revenue rate. And basically, it's important to know that the no new revenue rate is this same exact property compared to the same exact property last year. So it doesn't take into account any new values or any changes in existing properties. It has to be completely apples to apples for that no new revenue rate to apply. So that's a really big calculation, and we're way too soon with the amount of protests we
No
have.
changes to the property. In other words, if the property was appraised at a higher rate this year, it's not applied to that new higher.
It has to be,
valuation.
so it's my understanding, and that would be a specific CURCAD question, but that if you have this pen and this pen are exactly the same as they were last year,
Dollar for dollar,
dollar for dollar. So
not property for
not property for property. Yeah, same dollars to same. The value is going to go up,
Correct.
but even though the value goes up, they're only comparing properties that were in existence last year.
Oh, so not,
Not new value.
Nothing
not a
new.
new hotel, not a.
Correct.
Right.
All
How
of that
about
is in a
dirt?
separate bucket.
That's right.
That's correct. If it's just dirt, it's valued.
But to be clear, I asked EA, and didn't you say it was be about 180,000?
That's what we're estimating right now.
So if we did a no new tax, or what is it called?
No new revenue.
No new tax revenue rate, the new value added is going to be in somewhere of the ballpark of 180. We would only get 183 more than.
And
we have
that's
this year.
assuming we use the same tax rate we used last year. So it'll be less than that if we reduce it.
That would be, for us to have a no new revenue tax rate, what we would actually be able to receive above that is going to approximately be 183,000. So it'd be what we collected last year plus 183,000.
From new properties.
New properties
new
that were
properties
not
that
on the
were
tax
not on
roll
there.
last year.
Correct.
That's
So-
the way it helps
Yes.
me to understand.
Yeah. So the next, go ahead.
Your question.
I said, Joe's
No,
thinking.
just the pie's slightly bigger, but it's only $183,000 bigger.
Right.
That's right.
So, okay, so the next slide is just, again, reminding you of the process. So we have been getting ongoing updates from Kirkad, just to let us know how it's changing as they're working through the protest process. She sends me those on request or every couple of weeks, whichever is sooner. So we keep looking at those, updating what we can, making estimations where we can. It's just difficult at this point in time.
Are you seeing a lot of downtick
Yeah.
with are there a lot of successful
Yeah,
protests?
they're working through them pretty quick. We're seeing a pretty good downturn. And typically, I looked back over the last 3 years, we're seeing anywhere from 3 to 5% from original roll, preliminary to certified roll is what we see on the decline. So that's another reason it makes it really hard for us to say, well, this is where we think we should be from a rate. We're just not there yet.
I think this is a really good opportunity to just remind council and public that KCAD is a totally separate and independent organization. The city does not in any way set the appraised values of property. The city is only able to set tax rates that then apply to those. Per state law, those are very, very separate entities.
So again, the 725 is kind of our magic day. Until then, it's all estimations. And so we'll propose the property tax rate to you along with the budget in August. And that will be approved as part of that, in parallel with the budget process. So just giving you a snapshot on this next slide of market value comparisons over the last few years. You can see on the fiscal year 23 preliminary, this is market value that I pulled, I believe, as of 6/10. And you can see what's still under ARB review. So that's a pretty big number there at almost 416 million still under review. So with that amount of value out there, it's really hard. We can't get to a rate yet. So we're estimating what we did was we calculated 5% over fiscal year 22 budget for this exercise as far as deciding on what we thought we should estimate for revenue. So we'll continue to work on that up or down, just depending on how valuations come back.
And again, that's just an estimate on increase in revenue, not an
Correct.
increase in the tax rate,
That's right.
obviously.
Right, just looking at revenue. $36 million is what was given to us as new value. Last year's budget was 28 million. Those are subject to review too if those property owners do file a protest. They just have to meet the deadline. So some of that could be rolled up into this ARB. It's just hard to say how that's broken out just yet. So the next slide gives you some information just on historical rates and revenue, and I know that it gets kind of confusing with this percent graph that goes across the top. That line is just showing you what the rate has done. So you can see the number of years that it stayed steady. I only went back
like
10
that.
years, but if we went back 2 more years, that rate was still flat.
I like this a lot. Is this new?
We
always have
had it
this?
similar. We had this last year.
Similar.
Okay, I really like. Yeah.
So you can see that revenues are going up, but the rate is going
Right.
down. So there's a
That's very
direct
transparent,
impact.
though.
Yeah.
There's a
I
direct
mean-
impact. I mean,
Yeah.
the rate can go down, but you can still have values go up. And
That's
I think
right.
you can still have
Well, and it goes
revenue go up.
and it just continues to reiterate the point that the cost of doing business goes up every year, but
That's right.
but we're adjusting to make, you know.
We can try to give citizens as much relief as we can. I mean, I don't think that's ever been the goal.
Right. I
So,
like that.
so this on the right is just kind of a text version of the graph, and so you can see the tax rates broken out by the M&O and the INS there. So you can see how long our INS rate has been the same, and it goes back way before this. Like, I couldn't find where it was more than this or less than this. And so I have the projection plugged there for the public safety impact. Again, that is projected, and Ann will be coming to the 28th meeting to give you guys a market update, and then also bring you up to date on where we are with the facility.
So the overall tax rate is going to increase
It will.
this year because there's a significant change in the INS.
Correct.
So we're going to, in essence, want to reduce the M&O,
That would
right,
be
for
ideal.
for the maintenance and operations if we can, right? Because we can't go above 3.5% anyway.
Over the no new revenue rate.
But when we combine those two numbers, we're likely going to have
Correct.
an increase, which I mean,
You'll have an increase per the voter approved.
Right, voter approved,
INS
that's
rate.
right.
You when they.
That's
Absolutely.
right, voter approved,
Absolutely.
yep.
Yeah, now what that full impact is, we won't know until we get those certified rolls.
Right, then you add in this
But
rate, right?
yeah, there absolutely will be an increase
Yeah.
per the voter approved
Yeah,
debt.
yeah,
That's
okay.
Right, and we just wanted to show what we're projecting for that. Every conversation we've had with Hilltop and she is really confident that she can keep us at that estimated rate even with the market changes. So we'll let her come and talk to you about that and kinda how that proposal's gonna work moving forward, so. Okay, so just a little bit, and we talked kind of about this through this, but just some assumptions on property tax. I currently have property tax revenues at 11.07 million. That's a 5% revenue increase over fiscal year 22 budget. And again, that only includes current taxes. So when I talk to you at council about past due or prior year, there's no way to predict those, so we budget those two pieces based on historical data, because that's really all we have. This year, it's really strong. We just never know. We think real estate sales may have a lot to do with that if people have had outstanding taxes and those kind of things.
But overall, we have a very good collection rate.
We do.
It's in the upper 90s on an annual basis, and then even actually those past collections are pretty strong. They usually come in, and like Julie mentioned, it may just take a property sale and a lien to get there.
Now, this right here on property tax revenue, this is overall, we're not just talking about, like, I mean, because 5% is including our voter approved, I don't understand, explain to me the difference between
General-
3.5 and 5%.
Okay, so the 5%, so basically, if you look at the general fund property tax revenue now,
Okay, gotcha, I'm with you now.
I added 5% to that
that,
based
not
on.
to the tax.
Correct.
Okay.
Not the rate.
Based on what
This
we've
is on
seen.
revenues.
Right,
Based
okay.
on what we've seen historically, that increase
That's
be
not a
year to year.
collection
That is not a
increase.
collection, so the
That's
debt
a-
portion of the rate actually gets deposited into a different fund.
Gotcha.
So that money never
Okay.
touches the general fund.
Okay, so
that
that
has to-
5% is not in collections, it's in our
That's correct.
budget. Okay,
That's
thank you.
correct.
Yep, got it.
And then I did notate that 180,000 we were talking about just a little bit ago. Just keep in mind that's based on valuations that we received last week, and that's also assuming that we use the current property tax rate that we're using now. I just wanted to kind of get somewhere close on what we might be looking at in new revenue, just based on that $36 million. This does assume that the property tax rate remains the same or is lower than fiscal year 22, and again, we'll work through that as we get more updated rolls. Preliminary roll can change significantly, and we've seen that, and I said historically between 3 and 5% that I see from preliminary to certified. So I kind of built those factors in when I came up with that projection. So estimated roll was used in 2020, and we did talk about that earlier because they couldn't get to certified. And if you remember, that was the first year of the big valuation swings, and we had so many protests. So it's my understanding there are quite a few protests this year as well.
You're anticipating that we get an estimated then? Don't know.
I'll give that another few weeks, and I think Sharon will be very upfront with me if she doesn't feel like they're gonna get there. But right now, every time I get an updated roll, it's clear that they're working through those protests because you can see a change.
So we won't belabor this slide because we've mentioned it a few times, but obviously We did have the voter-approved public safety facility for $45 million. Again, Ann will be coming to town here on the 28th to tell you all what the market impacts are. We're optimistic that that rate that has been estimated previously will be maintained. We're not seeing a lot of movement in the municipal bond market. We feel our financial advisor has felt like that has been even just the recent 75 basis point increase on the Fed rate has already kind of been baked into the pricing models. So we're hopeful of that, but again, we're monitoring on a day-by-day basis because there's a lot. It's a dynamic environment at the federal level. So again, this does not have any impact with those that have frozen property taxes. So those that are over 65 and the other applicable frozen pieces that have filed that, this will not have any impact on them whatsoever. And then, again, once the certified roll is issued, then we'll be able to really hone in on those calculations exactly of what that proposed rate will be.
And just a follow, I'm sorry, please.
I've been using my brain to try to figure out what INS stands for.
Interest in sinking.
Sinking.
Yep.
So one thing I didn't put a chart in here for, but I think is important, is EA talked about frozen taxes. I did do a comparison percentage-wise, and we're still hanging around that 29, 29.5, 29.6% of our tax base is frozen.
It's very, very high for Kerrville.
So that does have an impact, on those who aren't, but it is important to know that it's that much of it. Any questions or comments or discussion on property tax? Good, okay. We'll talk about my favorite subject now.
They're all your favorite
Yeah,
subjects.
this one is particularly, it's super interesting. So we're estimating, as we talked, for sales tax to be 30% of general fund revenue. It's up just a few percent from what we had budgeted for last year. My assumption is that we will be about 10.5 million for fiscal year 23, and that's using a 6% over what I'm projecting fiscal year 22 will end. So there's a lot of projections in there and estimations, but we watch that every month and we do some really deep dive analysis of what's impacting sales tax. So when we see that May at 1% and everybody, you kind of hold your breath for a little bit. When we start really diving into those reports that come from the comptroller, we can see what's swinging and is it something big that we need to be worried about, or was it from an audit payment, or what's happening? Was there a refund? So there's a lot of things we can dig into from our side and see, and we do that every month. And so we came back at 12% on this last one that we just received. So we know kind of what the driver was for that May anomaly there. So we feel
Was it a one-off?
it was a one-off. It was a one-off. We are seeing retail flatten a little bit as far as percent growth, but you also have to remember how big retail grew in 21. So it's going to take a lot for it to grow at that same degree.
I need to ask a policy question if we're at 30,000 feet. Is there a danger policy-wise to be 30% dependent upon sales tax?
It's always volatile. We were at 27.8 or something last year, and about that the prior year, and we've exceeded that every year. I will say we do stay pretty conservative when we're talking about our monthly increases between 12 and 14%, that we're staying down in that 6 range. Just saying that even with inflation and cost increases and everything, we feel like that's very attainable, just based on what's happening now. And we have about 5 years of data that we kind of use to back that up. Now, could the bottom fall out? I mean, our 30% of our sales tax comes from our top 5 sales taxpayers, and that's retail and manufacturing. So
The financial markets are indicating we may be headed for a recession.
Yeah.
Which would affect our sales tax, right?
right.
Well, and I'll tell you, also, since I've been on council, I think every year we've been able to do a mid-year adjustment. So that gives us 6 months, and then that gives us a better trend line. And so that was how we were able to go back and fund the raises that we wanted to provide. But starting out with that what you feel is a conservative number, I mean, we don't want to sandbag it, but I always feel comfortable in the middle of the year saying,
Where did we really hit?
here's where here's where
My
we are.
feeble memory says that property tax revenues, water, sewer revenues are fairly stable.
That's correct.
Sales tax, Lord only knows.
And I think I included it in here, or maybe
Volatile.
I might not
Water's
have. Let me see.
volatile too.
See if I put my usual. So I didn't put my typical chart in here, but I did give you a different one that kind of on the
Sorry,
next
I'm
page.
just wondering if
No,
it's
you're
policy-wise, is there a danger to being that dependent upon, when 1/3 of our dollars are coming from a volatile, historically volatile source.
Well-
Is that a problem?
And I think that year over year, we're 7, 8, 10, 12, I mean, we trend higher than what they
Good.
Yeah,
they
we're
estimate.
trying to-
Being conservatives helps us because
Yes.
what we don't want is this to blow up in our faces when we're
Absolutely.
HEB.
We get more, I
Absolutely.
think we get
Come to our
more, I
Facebook.
think we get more criticism from people saying we're not calculating enough
Ah.
in sales tax because every year we come to the middle of the year and fortunately have been in a situation where we can then
Adjust,
then
yeah.
adjust.
Thank you.
Now, it does take away a little bit of that flexibility by increasing, you know, the percent that you're estimating. You're estimating a little bit higher percent than the 3% we did last year.
Yeah. Do
But
you feel
it's-
good about that?
I feel good about it, and I look at it almost every day. But, you know, you have to keep in mind that is it healthy for us to say, well, we're going to budget 2% or 3%, and then I come back to you and say, we've got $2 million more than we budgeted, and I guess the messaging there from how
Right.
reliant are we on property tax, or are we using this as kind of a hidden savings account
Right.
in a way?
We
And
get criticized for that.
it's both
yeah.
ways, and I mean, I
Right.
certainly do not want to come back to you and say, I'm sorry, but
didn't hit
6%
budget,
was too
yeah.
high. But if we're doing our job, we're gonna see that coming ahead of time,
Yeah.
and we'll be able to make adjustments ahead of time if we need be. I feel good that we're consistently being 12, 14, 15% every month over the past 3 years virtually, and that we're putting in 6. I feel like
What's
that's
the
pretty
lag
healthy.
time?
I'm sorry, 2
Lag?
months.
2 months.
So it is kind of hard to project because we don't actually receive September sales tax dollars till November, so we're actually booking a receivable based on a projection. So that's another reason why it's really important that we're staying up with projections and knowing what to expect.
I think,
So,
from my perspective, Councilmember Herring, the city is fairly balanced right now in regards to a third of revenues basically coming from sales tax, a third from property tax, and a third from other fees and sources. Certainly in other communities that are much more retail and sales tax centric, where they're getting up into the 50s and 60%, they've had to take other measures of setting up separate reserve funds essentially as a ballast in case an IKEA moves out of town or a major retailer shifts, and so that's a cause for concern. Ours is a little bit more broad-based, although as Julie mentioned, our top 5 taxpayers do represent a very high portion. But I do feel like we've got good balance right now. It is trending up though on sales tax, and so we have to recognize that volatility. So it's a point well taken.
Thank you.
So is there a point when we would ever get to considering that? You said around 50% or something? I mean, if we ever.
that would frighten me a little
Yeah,
bit.
that would be
Yeah.
frightening to me too. I mean, I think that 1/3 level is fairly consistent. I think as we continue, we always sense pressures on property tax, particularly as we've seen rising appraisal
It's more
values, right?
political.
And so I think we just have to be cognizant about trying to maintain some balance there.
Anyway,
Yeah, good point, and we do, I mean, like I said, we look at that
and visitors
as much
help us
as we
pay
can.
sales tax.
That's
and
right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely right.
We receive sales tax from online sales still.
Yes.
As of now.
And it
yeah.
is a way,
there any
in
fear that
addition,
that's
most
what
of
Not right
our,
now, but-
we're a regional economy, right? And so we pull in folks that are utilizing our commercial economy from the 9 county surrounding area. And so it is a way for us to import some of those sales tax dollars from elsewhere. We also have to be cognizant about our folks traveling outside to go to major metro areas and do some shopping as well. So that's important. It's a part of our economic development strategy as we try to recruit retailers here.
Well, and remember the online sales tax that we receive also applies to the ETJ. So we have these extra folks out in the county that are ordering things in that we're actually getting sales tax dollars from those as well. The next slide kind of reiterates what we just talked about as far as percent change and just in support of what we've been talking about, looking historically, all the way back to 2012. We did have the one lower year there, you can see in 2018, but the percent increase just, I mean, it supports what we're saying with the 6%. 21 being the outlier, of course, right now as far as that high percent, but there was a lot of stimulus money that was being put into the economy right then too. So there's a lot of factors, and again, going back to the when will we see normal, I don't know what that is, and so that does make it a little bit hard to predict because of the things that we've been dealing with over the past few years that directly affects sales
Well, I
tax.
don't understand this
The
blue line.
percentage.
So the blue line is percent change.
From the previous
From the
year.
previous year. So if you're looking at 21, it's, almost 14% over where we were in 20.
So if you think about the bars behind it, that's revenues collected.
Right, got that part.
If you think about the blue line, that's really, are you accelerating or are you decelerating? And so oddly, as from 2018 up and even through the pandemic, you really saw the increase accelerating, right? And that's really kind of based off of consumerism. And then what this blue line shows really from 21 to 22 and then 22 to 23 is a deceleration, right? So we saw 2 years ago 14% increase over the year. Last year at 12%. This year we're saying 6%.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's really as we're seeing that departure of stimulus and individual stimulus dollars come out of the market, savings kind of eroding, inflation going up, costs going up,
Yeah.
and so while we feel like that 6% is conservative, we feel like it's attainable. We don't feel like a double-digit number is attainable.
Okay.
I'd always rather bring you good news than.
Right.
We would like that.
I like that too.
We don't like a mid-year scramble on
Yeah,
sales tax.
we-
So what
don't
are we
need that.
not gonna be able to do?
Exactly. Any other questions or comments about sales tax?
No, but can I have a mint?
Absolutely, I'm in the same boat as you are. Anyone?
My head feels better.
Good, see?
Good.
See? Magic, I told you.
I can still taste it though. I have
Okay, on to the fun stuff. So we'll start talking about expenses. I gave you kind of the same view of expenses as we did on revenue, so 22 percentages by category compared to 23. And just, again, just to let you know, the dollars are really what changes. A percentage doesn't. The way we do business pretty much stays the same year to year unless there's a big outlier. And I think that speaks to EA's point about keeping things like CIP projects separate, asset replacement separate, because if we had those thrown in there, you would see these big shifts in percentages just because of the way we're spending one-time expenses. But again, for financial reporting, yes, sir.
Do we consider gasoline a supply?
Yes, sir.
And we're not assuming there's gonna be an increase in that?
We are. We're gonna.
The whole thing's gonna.
The whole thing
That's
is,
bigger.
exactly. So the dollars go up, so when on the spread, the percentages are landing about the same. So,
That's impressive in that the pie must be growing at a fairly good clip to absorb those increased supply costs.
Well, the interesting aspect, again, is that we're seeing the inflationary effects across all these different functional areas. And so regardless whether it falls into supplies or whether it falls into contractual services or other elements, unfortunately, it's affecting every aspect of the operation.
So you kind of straight lining that as far as,
well.
No, it's
when
not
we-
straight
It's
line.
not
it
straight
just
line.
worked out
It
that way.
just kind of is working that direction.
Now, that could change a little bit. We did change the fuel this past week, and that's not reflected in here yet, but I don't think it's gonna be enough dollars on 35 million to throw the percentages out.
Are we driving less?
We're doing
We are
what we
being
can.
very cognizant. We just had an email go out yesterday about fuel usage and
Yeah.
reminding everybody where we're at, and we're right at, basically, we've utilized the budget at this point that we had allocated for this year for fuel.
Wow.
And we're 6, 7, almost 7 months in, so
Wow.
it's painful. We're
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
So a lot of adjustments going on out there departmentally, but,
Bicycles.
and we're,
We're investing in
scooters,
One wheels.
yeah, horses, although they probably eat more.
So I'll take this one just real quickly, and again, not to belabor the point that we made earlier.
Something?
But we are very much, general fund is very much public safety focused, and certainly, as we had a lot of the conversations with the community over the course of the winter and the spring in regards to public safety facility, and also harkening back to Cribble 2050 about public safety really being priority number one. 62% of our general fund is going towards our public safety operations. I think it's really important to also recognize that a big chunk of our internal services, IT, finance, administration, HR, are also to service these. There's no HR department over in KPD or KFD. There's no separate finance department over there, and so these internal service functions are really predominantly servicing our public safety operations. So
How do you account for that?
they're counted simply, the 62% is simply the pure
Personnel.
departmental operational costs, right? So that's not any of the internal services being provided to them.
Okay.
But I can guarantee you could probably add another, 20, 25, 30% maybe to that in regards to services being provided for those entities. So it's just important to know, certainly as the public is digesting budgets, they see a lot of zeros. It's important to know what those zeros are going to. And the reality is it's going to folks with badges on that are answering the phone when you call 911.
So the next slide is just a little bit more detail on expenses relating to the graph. So again, these are estimated at this point. They change every day. But there's some assumptions in here just so that you know how we've built this so far. So assuming that we maintain the 4% step plan increase for public safety, those who are applicable employees for that year. We're assuming a merit increase for all general government employees in '23. A health insurance increase, we don't really know how that's gonna land just yet, but Kim will be bringing that to you in a workshop in July. As she always does, to give you an update after she's still in the negotiation process on that. And this 10% personnel was impacted, if you remember, by the mid-year adjustment, so there's some of that consideration in there.
Okay, can I say something real quick?
Please.
I just wanna put it out there that right now, 3% is really, almost a decrease in salary when you pair it to inflation.
Right.
And I think that I'm just putting it out to council members now. Should we get to a mid-year and have, be ahead on our collections of sales tax and, ahead of our projections, I would like to see a mid-year adjustment if we're gonna assume 3% at this point.
Yeah.
And that's me as one council member, but, as me as being part of a family business and knowing what that does to our employees and how we had, changed the amount that we're increasing salaries by this year based on inflation. I just wanted to make that as a statement that I think that's important for us to consider. If not now.
Right. I can certainly bring you the numbers and give you the differential between 3%, 4%, 5%, and just put them out there so at least you know what that looks like and what that impact would be. I mean, I can give that to you. We can play with it a little bit and see, but yeah.
We have not proposed any cost of living adjustment here, and really two reasons for that. One was the mid-year adjustment that the staff is extremely thankful for. But also just the dynamic situation of where CPI is and whether is it continuing to go up, is it continuing to go down? We'll know a lot more by the end of the summer. We didn't really know where we're at here, and quite frankly, we just couldn't afford it given this current piece, assuming that not knowing where property tax revenues and other elements were going to be put at. But we do feel like by the end of the year we will have a much better idea of where revenues are at, where inflation is at.
End of what year? Fiscal year?
Into this fiscal year, well, and into the calendar year, quite frankly. We've also, we are proposing to do, as we've talked about with you all, do another compensation market study in the fall timeframe. No doubt all of our neighboring communities and competitors for labor are adjusting rates and pay rates throughout the summer, and so we felt like it was very effective last fall to be able to do that and to be able to make sure that we are maintaining competitiveness in the market so that we're not down multiple staff members, particularly in our public safety agencies. And so we feel like being able to do that mid-year adjustment and potential mid-year COLA and market adjustment it's a very effective strategy for us in this dynamic environment.
I mean, we want to be proactive, but at some point,
Right.
we have to be reactive based on what, the numbers show mid-year,
I just feel like for staff it's important to recognize that we do understand that inflation is real. It affects all of us.
Yeah.
Costs more to get to work.
Yeah,
It
you
costs
have
more to
less buying power than you had a year ago.
Exactly.
And less buying power than you had 2 years ago. So they're very appreciative of that.
so.
Thank you.
Supplies, up 13% over fiscal year '22. Again, that could change as we continue to change gas prices and fuel across the board. So supplies includes, to answer Joe's question, office supplies, small tools and equipment, chemicals, uniforms, fuel, and obviously fuel and chemicals are our biggest drivers there
Can I-
that we're seeing.
Since the percentage overall stayed the same, can I assume the pie grew 13%?
The pie grew, I have to do the math,
The
35,
supplies are up 13%,
yes,
and the rate
That is
overall
correct.
is 5%. And
Yes.
we're assuming the pie grew 13%.
that's correct. And you'll see that kind of trend continue on the next page when we're looking at maintenance, 12%. In maintenance category, our software maintenance agreements fall in there, and we have seen some increases in technology, so that was an impact there. Streets also falls in the maintenance category unless
But-
we're doing,
I'm sorry.
no, please.
Your pie chart, comparing the two,
Where?
the pie chart on page. Just look at it, too.
17?
Plus
What's my total expenses?
17.
35 million.
We're assuming the pie grew 13%, maintenance actually went down 1%.
There, yeah.
So on this, it shows that
I'm gonna give it to
maintenance
you.
is up 12%.
13%. Is that what you're saying?
I'm gonna give you the total growth.
I don't know. I'm not good at that kind of math.
I'm gonna fixing to give it to you.
Right.
What's my expense, where's my expense total? I'm fixing to give it to you.
That makes sense, that makes sense, because it's
Well,
only, it's 1% different, and the pie chart shows 1% decline, so that makes sense.
God, quit complicating.
About 9.5. Yeah, about 9.5.
Keep thinking about pie, it's almost lunchtime.
It's about 9.5%
Thank you.
overall. No, please, that's what we're here for. Huh? Yeah.
Pie.
That's your
What kind of pie?
Okay, on page 20, services, so our services, we're gonna include utilities, insurance, so we are seeing an increase over the last few years in liability insurance. Workers' comp a little bit, but liability being the biggest impact there. Professional services is also in that category. And then our community, our other does include our community support that we provide out to local agencies that are providing support pieces to the community. So those would include K-Star, we send a little bit of money their way, CASA, multitude of DDR, those kind of places that we send money out to. They're in there too, yes, yes. So
Hey,
there-
quit
there's
singling me out.
there's 6, I believe 6 or 8 community service agreements that we have in place right now. So those are in this.
Goes to Doyle.
Yeah, a little bit goes to low, and they're not huge pieces,
Yeah.
but those pieces are what's in this line item right there, as well as any subscriptions.
Yeah,
and
and
things
again,
we
those are for services that are essentially the city then is not having to produce internally,
Right.
right? And so it's an ability for us to pitch in on typically a nonprofit or other agency in the community that is helping us and keeping us from having to, do that from an operation because they do it better, quite frankly. And it's something they do day in and day out, and so we're able to give them some resource rather than having to take on that responsibility ourselves.
Those are lined in the budget.
They are.
They are.
So, it's up 2%. Do we have any idea what the estimated total value of that?
There is one factor in here that may bring that down a little bit, that's our settlement that we're not sure whether we're gonna get yet. I don't know how deep we wanna go into that, but,
I don't wanna go deep.
there is a factor in here that may bring that down to flat, but right now with what we have plugged based on some assumptions about some money that we may get this year compared to next year,
Roughly
we're,
60 to 70,000.
that could come out of this line.
I think.
It depends if we get it this
As a
year or next
total?
year.
As a total, I
As we
think.
go further in the process, further in the process, we'll get to see the
Absolutely.
weeds on this.
You will.
Have that.
We'll have it line itemed for you, with specific detail. And anytime you wanna know specifically, like even where we are now, I can tell you where we are now, but
I'll be
that could
lost
change
by
tomorrow.
then, so-
It could change tomorrow, which is why we don't get too
Yeah.
deep into that right now.
Gotcha.
Okay, and the last line here, transfer, so I know that's a scary number, but there's a reason that's 65%. So a couple drivers there. We are, in 2022, we budgeted $440,000 to move to general fund asset replacement. And that's where we buy vehicles, equipment, those kind of things from.
Okay, this is where I get lost.
Yeah,
every
that's why I'm gonna
single
try
year.
to-
Okay.
Okay, so consider a transfer, the general fund is gifting this money to the asset replacement fund. Keeping in mind, asset replacement is still part of the general fund. It's just because we have to have the money in that fund to spend the money in that fund.
Yeah.
So it's an expense to the general fund and it's a revenue to the asset replacement fund.
So our general fund that's not being, that the money that's sitting in the general fund.
Correct.
That's not allocated. If you wanna move it somewhere, you have to transfer it.
That's correct.
So if you have an old-timey roll-top desk with these pigeonholes, this is general fund, I need to take this money,
Put it over there.
it's all the general fund, but
Right.
I'm now designating it as.
So it's just undesignated to designated.
Yeah.
That, I think I might not have to ask next year.
That's okay.
It's a BC powder.
And again,
Take one before everybody.
and again, from a transparency perspective, it's really about trying to, we have some large purchases within that general asset replacement. For instance, fire truck. Fire truck may cost between $750,000 and $1.5 million. And so if we were to have that within an operational budget, you'd see these huge
Yes.
swings. And so it's just very hard to compare from year to year. So
Yeah.
we really try to separate out what is operations and doing the same service level from year to year versus these other one-time
Right.
expenses, whether they're more capital and facility based and it goes into that community investment plan,
Right.
or whether it's the general asset replacement, like which is more typically rolling stock.
When we talk about our quote savings account, this is unallocated general fund money, or is this a separate thing we have?
Well, it will be part of our budget, so it will actually be an expense to the general fund.
Okay.
Because we're basically, if you put the asset replacement back in, then that money would be allocated there.
Yeah.
So we're basically allocating that money to that asset replacement.
Right, and that part I
Think of it as a
understand, but
division
when
or a
we talk
department.
about, but when we talk about how much money we have in savings,
The reserve
the
fund
Fund balance?
reserve
Yeah.
funds.
That
Okay,
is
so-
different entirely than what we have in asset replacement or
Right,
or
not
capital
asset,
improvement.
but I mean, is
Our
the,
fund balance?
that's still in the general fund?
Correct. It's still, so you're talking about fund balance, our savings account. We're
Yes.
not touching that.
Right.
That is reserved, and
Right.
so when we talk about fund balance as being our savings account, that's our reserve funds. We don't touch that for operational. So if we came to you and said we have excess funds at the end of the year, then we could make a determination. We want to allocate
Asset
some of those to
replacement
here, or no, we want
But
that
that's-
just to keep stay in fund
But that's
balance.
still gonna be considered, fund balance is still gonna be considered in general fund, the same way asset replacement
That's right.
is.
That's right.
Yes.
So it's designated.
It is.
It's not just that general money
That's
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 out
right.
there.
It is designated.
designated.
It's saying that we're taking the 750,000 and saying you can't
So
spend it anywhere.
That number doesn't
except here.
change until we say put more here.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
Thank you.
It's really almost like three separate little
Yeah.
savings accounts.
Well, and if-
Sorry, y'all. Every year
No,
I have to
it's-
pick up a new little thing that I didn't understand the year before.
Yeah, when you're
Like you
making,
said, the designation, that's good, that's a
Right.
good way to get a handle on
Yeah.
it, for me.
because we're saying this is how this money has to be spent, by putting it to asset
Yeah.
replacement. If we're gonna take it out of there, we have to come to council and ask for
Right.
approval for
Yeah.
that.
Like you put some money in the swear jar, you
Yeah.
put some money in the vacation.
Right.
Exactly.
I just want to know if I'm telling a citizen that we have this much, in our quote savings account, that number is a hard number. It's not
That
going to
is.
fluctuate based on moving and transferring money to other funds.
It only
Right.
fluctuates with
If
council
we
approval.
say take it out and move it.
That's correct.
Okay, that's, yeah.
And the percent may fluctuate a little bit depending on
Right.
your revenue and expenses every year,
Right.
but the dollars are there.
Okay.
What's the limit? What's the limit as to what can be held in that?
General fund,
Yeah.
I think it's
Legislative
30.
25.
Well, that, we have to maintain 25,
have
but
to
what's, there's a maximum. I'll get you that.
Oh,
I'm not
okay.
sure what the maximum
Okay.
is, because there is a point to where we can't just be
Right.
stockpiling money.
Right.
I think it's in the 30s, but I'll go look, I'll check that out for you,
Okay.
it might be 40.
We always want to keep 25 to 30 is kind of what we want.
25 is what we have to.
Right.
We sit around closer to 30.
Yeah.
We start getting
And
above
25,
that.
when you say what we have to, that's our self.
Well, there's a
or
couple.
is
There's
that a
two
state?
pieces.
There's couple pieces to it. So there's best practices. There's certainly what the audit community recommends. There's also what the bond community recommends, because remember, it's how debt worthy you are. Right?
Yeah.
And so when you do issue
Yeah.
debt,
You wanna have
that's
a-
a factor that plays into that, and that is one of the reasons why we do have a great credit rating,
Reserve.
right?
It's
Because we
percentage
have a
of
healthy
revenue.
reserve.
It's a percentage of revenue.
It's percentage of revenue.
Well, because the reason I'm asking is because during the whole issue with the KPD complex, the biggest question was, why didn't you save the money up? And what was
We
said.
couldn't, okay,
We
I
were-
see what you're saying, yeah.
Right.
We weren't
We couldn't
allowed to,
have
we
saved
couldn't
that much
have
money.
that amount
Right.
in savings, so I kind
I'll,
of.
I'll tell you what that
That's a
percent is,
good-
I'll get that for
I understand
you.
where you're coming from.
Okay.
That's good.
Thank you.
I'll let you know what that percent is, because
Okay.
there is a maximum that we're
Yes.
allowed to
Okay,
carry, I just
that's-
don't know that off the top of my head. 25 is what we have to by law.
Okay, 25.
but we usually stay a little bit above that.
Okay, okay.
Before we leave these
Yes.
bullet point expenses, I wanted to, I'm trying to figure out where I'm missing something. So our proposed expenses or estimated expenses is more than what we're doing on our proposed revenue. I want to clarify, is that taking into account transfers?
Yes.
Is that mainly because of that? It's not leaving the city, it's an expenditure because it's going elsewhere? in a
Correct.
different- Okay.
So that does
So
get
that's
confusing
where it gets
because,
confusing, yeah.
because
That's why I
it
wanna
is an
make sure.
expense and a revenue. So
that, yeah.
whenever, if you look in your budget book in that first explanation there, it backs out those net transfers so that you can see what the impact of those is. Because we are keeping the money within the city,
Right.
but we
Right.
have to, for accounting purposes, you have to take it out of one and put it in another.
Where's that in the budget?
It's in the first part of the narrative there. If,
Okay.
I can send you a page number on that.
Okay.
And it talks about the net of the interfund transfer. So basically, if you backed out the interfund transfers, this is actually what your total revenue
Right.
would be. Because money moving from one fund to the other, it's
really
city
leaving.
money, it's not
Not leaving
leaving.
the city, right.
It's just for accounting purposes to make sure that, for example, we move money to development services. Development
Mm-hmm.
services is part of the general fund. But to balance their budget, we have to
Uh-huh.
transfer.
And make that as an expense,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, but if you brought them back in and just added everything together, kind of similar to what we're doing with golf, then it's all just one big bucket of money.
Sure.
So it's just an accounting.
Thank you.
I'll send you the page numbers in the front part of the
That's
budget
fine.
book in the budget
You
summary.
may have finally gotten me over the, at least to the, somewhere near the top.
I
of the
just
hill.
think about it as an expense to one fund and a revenue
Yeah.
to another.
Right, no, that makes sense.
So-
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing
Yeah,
anything
that's
else
good.
No.
when I saw those two numbers.
No.
Yeah, ultimately, as we've talked about before, we, by state law, we have to pass a budget that is imbalanced.
Yeah.
Right, we can't do anything otherwise, so, but it does look confusing sometimes.
Yes.
When you're looking at the revenues and expenditures to the different funds.
Yeah.
They're essentially transfers.
Yeah, and that's all it is, right? That's the only
Exactly.
difference is the transfer.
So, for example, when the water fund transfers the street use fee into the general fund, you're just moving that money from the water fund to the general fund. It's an expense to the water fund and a revenue to the general fund. Yeah. Okay, the next one is kind of what you asked for earlier. So this is looking at where we were as of the end of May for fuel. So you can see at the end of May for the general fund, we had used 96% of our budget in fuel. And so, we're estimating 87% increase, but really that's where we are. We did go back and increase it just a little bit this past week, by like 10 cents over what we're paying now, but we're just monitoring. We're
Yeah.
hoping we'll see a little bit of relief on the inflation side. Maybe that'll give it a little bit of release on the fuel prices. We just don't know, and we just don't wanna go in and next year say, we're
We
gonna
can't
hope
try
they
it
go
after
down.
June.
Right, right. So that's, so.
We increased it 30 cents. We had it at
Over
least-
the original,
Yes.
yeah, we went up a little bit this week again. So we're just continuing to monitor that, and the departments, what they do is go in and put in the gallons that they anticipate using based on their historical usage, and then that gives us the ability to go in and simply change the pricing
Yeah.
and not have to go back and try to reevaluate
Yeah.
where those numbers came from. So it's a pretty simple process, but, a dime here or there can make a big difference to your overall expense when you're talking about that many gallons.
Make
We're
every
just,
trip count.
again, we're a very
That's
fuel-centric
right.
organization. The reality is
That's what I tell
our
Bugsy.
officers are out there driving, our firefighters are out there driving, our ambulances,
Yeah.
tractors, mowers, everything we do is very fuel-centric.
And to that point, we have talked to departments, and I know their department directors are talking to them too and saying, try to make the best use of your trips.
Yeah.
Don't go over here and then all the way to Methodist encampment, and try to really just be strategic about your days. Sometimes you can,
Yeah.
sometimes you can't. It just depends on what the need is.
Yeah. And they have made cuts this year, quite frankly,
Yeah.
within their operations. They've had to pull back on other elements to be able to absorb these fuel costs. It's just the reality of it.
Hand Trina a couple slides.
Okay, so personnel is obviously a larger expenditure. So to the general fund this year, we are proposing a couple new positions in personnel. So Fire EMS is requesting a new firefighter paramedic position. So this hybrid position, it would just help more with staffing flexibility and kind of help us reduce some of the overtime we're seeing lately because of staff shortages and whatnot. And we're building towards a mobile integrated health program. Chief is here if he needs to extend on that if y'all have any questions.
What is it, mobile?
Yeah, what is,
Yes.
Chief?
Yeah, Chief, if you could just take 30
Yes.
seconds to talk through some of those pieces that were particularly coming out of the Public Health Task Force and what that means.
So one of the discussions out of the Public Health Task Force was working toward a mobile integrated health. Mobile integrated health kind of connects EMS that has an ability as that health navigators, but we have an ability to be out there in the field, connects with the hospital, and works with patients not to get them readmitted to the hospital, to provide some care and security. It's not something we're rolling out just yet, but this is a program that we're definitely working toward, and we're gonna have a little more ability, and this is gonna provide a little more flexibility to start to get toward that mobile integrated health
something-
MIH program.
Something we can look up and try to figure out what it is, because I don't understand what you're telling me.
Yes, and so it's really changing EMS from a you call, so we transport her to the hospital, to really more providing care in-house. So for instance, a diabetic that would need medication or assistance, so this mobile integrated health program would give us a name of Mrs. Jones. We would go out there, we would help her, making sure that she's taking her medicine, making sure she's doing things, so she doesn't call when it's in crisis mode, and then we transport to the hospital, and then the hospital gets a readmission, and so
Understand now.
that's
Thank
the program. So it's gonna take a little time to develop, so we're working with a medical director for that, we're working with a few other components on that. But that's the goal where EMS is really developing.
Thank you.
So
So-
it's kind of, Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
ask you.
Okay, so noting that it's a firefighter paramedic, meaning that where it says that it's gonna reduce overtime, that person can slide into without increasing their hours, they can slide into a direct fire EMS position?
Correct.
if-
So
Instead of causing another employee to have to come in for overtime hours?
So staffing always helps. So if we have additional staffing, then we have a minimum manning. So we have
Right.
minimum manning on shift, which means we have to maintain our capacity to respond with a certain number of engines,
Right.
ambulances, and staff.
And
So
time.
anytime we go below that, we pay overtime
Right.
for individuals to work that to make the
Right.
minimum staffing. So additional personnel helps toward
Right.
that because it keeps us above the
Right.
minimum.
So
From
like
either
they, like their
vacancies.
designation as being this mobile integrated health person is really a flexible type of,
I apologize. So this individual is not the mobile integrated health.
It's
This
just the
individual
department.
helps us operationally be able to do some components of that and really kind of work toward that. Because anytime we're at minimum or below minimum staffing, we're on engines, we're on
Right.
fire, on ambulances.
Understood.
So we don't get the flexibility to be out there in the field
Okay.
with that additional person because that's not part of our minimum staffing yet at this time. We're
building-
working toward it.
We're building towards it.
okay.
So at some point we will. But
So it's not like the one person's wearing two hats.
Right.
It's not like that, right?
no.
Not,
So.
not specifically as a manager. There won't be
Yeah.
one individual that will be assigned
Right.
specifically to mobile integrated health. It's gonna help really the whole department be able to be more proactive and be able to take on some of those tasks and build towards, eventually, potentially a whole team that really is dedicated to that.
Okay.
Okay.
So Chief, it's an intervention so that individuals don't end up in the hospital?
So it just provides that level of care out there. Maybe it's falls, maybe it's congestive heart failure, individuals that need ongoing care that have difficulties with that. That was something out of the Public Health Task Force that really talked about that health navigator, and that was an individual that can help those people when they get there. So I would see the mobile integrated health as us being able to provide a service for Mrs. Jones, maybe to get them to Health Navigator so they can get the help they need, or we can provide some of those services out there. It's a bigger program overall when we roll out the mobile integrated health. You'll all see that. It'll be a bigger program. This is just conceptual of kind of what we're looking
This
toward for
position
Kerrville.
is really primarily, not to cut you off, Steve, this is primarily regarding reducing overtime. We've seen a strong
I'm
uptick
confused,
this
so-
year, particularly on, well, when we've got folks going into an overtime position, they are not able to do those proactive type of tasks. And so it's really, we're not in a, potentially not in a full staff component right now, because of having folks that are out. We got hit
Right.
with, particularly this last year, with pandemic outages and other things in January, and so we're trying to get overtime costs under control.
Right.
Yeah,
I was just trying to see how logistically that.
And it is a move towards being proactive from a health perspective, if you can work towards getting to mobile integrated health and get these people taken care of before they wind up
In your
going to the
ambulance?
ER.
Correct, and I think that's the key on there. I
Yeah.
think it says builds toward the mobile integrated health program as
That may
somewhere
be
we
over-
want to be
over-
in the
Okay,
future.
okay.
Maybe over
Okay.
a few years to get
Yes.
to that staffing level to where we can do that,
Understood.
but.
Understood.
We can do it now if that's the recommendation.
No. I understand now.
So
So-
Chief, you guys make that call as to whether we go to see that individual or not?
We're not.
Or is that made by,
Yes, ma'am. So talking about the program itself, it would be a collaborative effort with Peterson Regional,
Yeah.
so they would definitely be involved. It is physicians that would be involved in that.
Sure.
Because now we're talking a little more outside of EMS's direct
not
acute
already.
care scope and
This is
providing
the
more
vision.
medications or providing more
I see.
care plans in the
Here
home.
now.
So, because people don't have access. We learned that people
Yeah.
don't have access.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's very exciting.
Okay.
It's San Antonio does it. That's a different level, a different scale of what they do. So they are very diverse in what they do. But other communities are doing it too, and they're providing that mobile integrated health. It's
Yeah.
definitely where we're going to need to be in the future.
This could
This
grow
just kind of helps us.
tremendously?
Yes, ma'am. So yes, ma'am. It gets us. It changes the game of what EMS is. Like I said, the U-Call. So we transport, we provide acute care. This is more long-term care, more helping people get back on their feet. So sometimes people just need that. That's the health navigator component we talked about.
Okay,
Okay, very good. Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
thank you.
Very welcome.
Okay. So also, there has been a proposed position in Parks, and this is the Assistant Maintenance Superintendent. And we're looking at primarily focusing this position on facility maintenance that, has come up in council. We've been kind of looking at as a concern, just making sure we have a future planning, master plan for maintaining all the facilities.
So this is a position that's really been requested over the last several years, and we haven't been able to accommodate it, given the very austere budgets that we've had in the last couple of years. But given strong focus from council on wanting to make sure that we are very much putting resources towards keeping an eye on our facilities and really getting our arms wrapped around the conditions of those facilities and being able to provide more proactive maintenance activity and oversight of that maintenance activity within the departments. We are proposing to fund this position this year because it will have a strong influence on that. It also helps us, as Ashley will tell you, if she wants to step to the podium, it helps us with some succession planning because we do have one of our longer tenured employees is our superintendent of parks, and he won't be with us forever, and so we do want to provide kind of a mid-level position under him to be able to train that personnel up so that there's a smooth transition within our organization when he does choose to retire. Hopefully many years from now, but he's getting up there in his years of service. So.
So that position is budgeted at just half a year right now, so we're kind of phase him in, or she. And then on the fire police side, we have some structural step plan changes. Still sticking with the 4% step plan for now, but they're looking at shifting little things. For this year in fiscal year 22, just to note some additions and changes, we had one new police employee who is converted to being the investigative analyst from, they were an intern. And then finance department added the finance compliance coordinator who handles a lot of our contracts and compliance on those, city P-card program, grant reporting, so doing a lot there. And that will go to full staffing now.
There's a full year impact in this proposed budget, so we just wanted to make you all aware of that.
Next slide, we have a little bit of TMRS update, because this all goes into expenses. Pension contribution rate has decreased from 10.64% to the 10.5%. And that decrease is primarily due to better than interest returns in 2021. I'm not sure what market they dabble in, but that's great for them.
Good one.
Yeah, a good one.
That
So.
market is gone.
Yeah, right.
Enjoy it now.
TMRS overall investment return was 7.57, and we had assumed 6.75, so that's that better than expected return.
Yeah.
So City of Carville's plan is almost 93% funded with assets of 90 million. So to us, that means if everyone was to cash out today, we can
Cover most of them.
cover most of them.
Don't get any ideas.
Right, that's a good point.
So TMRS overall funding has a 895 member fund, and that's 90.5% with assets of $38.5 billion.
What do we charge, what are we required? We want to be at least 85%, is that right?
Yeah, and so they give us, they always give the city an option to, this changes every year based off the actuarial components, right? And there's two main actuarial levers, essentially. One is how's the market doing, and then two, basically what's your level of retirees and ages and those pieces. And so they meld those together and then they spit out a number, and sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. Overall, I think the key piece here is to recognize that the city is almost fully funded compared to other cities,
Yeah.
and this is really based off of actuarial changes over the years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So compared to other cities, we're in a stronger position
Mm-hmm.
as far as that overall funding piece compared to TMRS, and so the city's
about that, yeah.
been good about funding those and making sure we're maintaining those actuarial standards.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in good shape.
Slide.
Yep.
Okay, jumping into streets, and this is the street maintenance funding in general fund. So fiscal year '23, we're currently budgeting that, proposing $2.15 million, and based on the pavement management plan, we're to increase 5% over the previous year. So this year we're increasing it by $155,000. So also that goes streets. Water fund pays the street maintenance for use of our streets and big equipment coming through here. So 4% is going to come in from water fund for '23. And
That's
we're
a transfer?
yes, and we are currently still working through the water revenues to get us that exact dollar amount. So we know it's going to be 4% of the water revenues.
So again, I just want to reiterate, we had this conversation a little bit earlier, but that 2.15 is exactly the number that was recommended within the pavement management plan for street maintenance activities, right? So that's kind of divorcing of the reconstruction efforts, which have been, a large portion of them have been attacked by the ability through the use of debt dollars, right? So it was really kind of two different strategies that are outlined. If you were only going to do it on an annual maintenance budget, you'd have to do it this way. If you're going to do it with a one-time plug and then ongoing maintenance, a different strategy. And that's the strategy that was chosen by council, and that's what's represented here.
Right.
We're continuing to go by that plan. Council continues to be aggressive in that annual funding level, and this budget represents that with another 5% increase over last year's budget and another $155,000 going towards street maintenance activities. We go through those maintenance activities every year with you all on what we do on slurry seal, what we do on crack seal, what we do on the other components, and get agreement and from the council on what those maintenance techniques are.
Why is it 4%? What determined that number, that 4% number?
It
I mean,
used-
instead of 5 or 10
Well-
or whatever.
So it's very consistent with our other franchise fees that we charge other utilities. So we try to maintain consistency with the other utilities,
Okay.
no different than K-Pub and Atmos and others. So
Okay.
it's basically we have utility trucks that are out there and they're cutting our streets and they're running on our streets and they got heavy vehicles, and so they need to be paying for that street,
Okay.
some of the street maintenance dollars.
And the pavement master plan, as they spoke about earlier, will be updated this year in fiscal year '23, and we'll be paying that out of CIP funding dollars.
By update, is they're gonna come out with the trucks again and do the
They're
whole?
gonna, that's right. So this
deal?
winter, we're proposing that they run the reassessment. And they'll go out there with the fancy
Yeah, do we get to
laser
go this
vehicle, and they'll get sure we can get a ride along if you want to. Just don't jump around in there because it measures the
I wouldn't
bounce.
jump around on my street.
Is this an outside supplier that does this?
It is, yeah. So they'll come in and they'll provide that technical
They do all
data,
the writing.
and then
It's really weird.
they'll work with our engineer that assists us in regards to street maintenance, and they'll reformulate that strategy for what we look at for the next 4 to 5 years. So
this is an update to the 2019 furlough.
Correct.
that's correct.
Who's doing it this year? Same?
We'll have
We'll have to go out.
to assess that. Yeah, we'll go out to look at what those costs are to do that, and then reincorporate that. So.
So David's here to speak about street reconstruction that's happened since the beginning. And we did have, it was $10.5 million bonds, 2019, $2 million went to drainage and $8.5 to street reconstruction.
So it's just a quick recap on what, it was broken down into 2 phases. So Phase A was completed in 2020 of these 6 streets. And then Phase B, we're wrapping that up with just a couple punch list items. So it's pretty much coming to an end. So
Again,
it's
these are the full reconstruction streets. So basically, it's a new street all the way down to the
Full
base
down.
level. Interestingly enough, just based off Kerrville's history and how long this community has been around, many of those streets, as we've dug into them, very poorly constructed originally. A lot of gravel, river rock that was utilized, and so they've been pretty extensive, but they've been built correctly now, and they should be very long-lasting assets.
There was some minor drainage improvements on some of those, so we did that as well. Yeah, so we're coming to an end on that, and things are looking great. So these streets are.
Yeah, the question was about Westminster. These are the ones that basically have been completed or nearing completion. Westminster is in our community improvement plan, and we'll talk about that more at our next budget workshop.
Yeah.
And this took a big improvement on that PCI with the reconstruction, and then what we're needing to fund every year from then on. So this was a big help.
PCI being Pavement Condition Index.
Of course.
Good.
You knew that.
It only takes you 3 years to remember.
And we have about a little over 1.4 million left in bond funds, and then all of those bond funds will have been expended.
Okay. How much you left?
1.4, I think, is what we calculated.
Yeah, give or take.
Reconstructed,
Yeah,
yes.
that's essentially finishing these up.
Oh,
Any questions for David on
On
streets?
Westminster.
yeah, just don't
If it
forget.
doesn't,
We won't forget.
We won't. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David.
it's a problem.
Okay, moving on to page 26, we have a couple of cybersecurity items, and I'm gonna be honest, you don't want me to talk about those, so I'm gonna ask Charlie to give us a little bit of high-level information on cybersecurity.
Hello, Mayor, Council. I'm pretty sure you guys are tired of seeing the word cybersecurity, but it's a very real threat out there. You've gone through your cybersecurity training. So we have 2 requests in for FY23. One is the cybersecurity assessment and penetration testing. It's recommended that you have it every 2 years. Our last one was in 2014. And as rapidly as that threat landscape is changing, it's something that we need to look at doing because of all these new services. Mr. Hoppy mentioned it earlier that we're in the business of providing services. Well, that services starts internally and then it's exposed to the internet. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities associated with that. So with an assessment, what that provides is kind of, it will provide us identify those vulnerabilities and how do we address that? How do we mitigate those risks?
And is that done by an outside source?
It'll be an outside source. You don't want an internal team doing that just because it'll be like opening a door that you already know the security code to. Because you're in the weeds, you're still in the weeds of implementing, and then you'll have these blind spots. So having a third party do that will probably give us a better.
What's the cost for that?
I've seen it range between 15 to 30,000.
What's the cost for not doing that?
Exactly. That's what Charlie
How
keeps
much data
telling
do we
us.
have?
Intangible.
Yes.
So
Priceless.
the second part of that is related to the first one. It's a cybersecurity operations center. It's also known as a SOC, security operations centers. Think of it as a cybersecurity emergency operations center that runs 24/7. So right now, our IT team, we have IT experts that specializes in cybersecurity, but no real cybersecurity analyst or cybersecurity engineer. So instead of coming to you guys and saying, can we have a new position for a cybersecurity analyst or a cybersecurity engineer, this will address that. It's a third party also that we will contract with, and it's going to be a team of cybersecurity engineers, analysts that will work with us, work with our team to address what vulnerabilities that we see. So we monitor all of our traffic actually, but we get so many alerts on a daily basis. I get 1,000 emails, average, about this is what's happening on this server. So to kind of filter through all that, it's in addition to doing what we do now.
So this will be offsite,
Yes.
like cloud-based or something?
It's gonna be with a vendor. They'll have their own team, their office offsite somewhere, but it's gonna be a tool for us to use. And again, we'll work closely with them. They'll be sent all of our logs, they'll monitor the same traffic we're monitoring, but they'll be able to respond much more quickly than us. A 2 o'clock in the morning, email that comes in, they'll be able to address the threat, eradicate the threat, whatever the case may be.
And is that the main benefit of not having an in-house cybersecurity assessor or engineer and contracting out to a third party?
Yes.
Is that the main benefit?
Yeah, and
Is,
it
is it
costs
more cost?
24/7 too.
I was gonna ask, that was my next
Right,
question. How
right.
is it more
So,
cost efficient?
I would say right now, we just had a local IT group meeting here in Kerrville, and one of the biggest challenges for our IT group is finding staff, finding whether it's going to be a IT expert or a cybersecurity analyst. So right now, it's hard to find for us to be able to pay someone to be that cybersecurity expert, in-house cybersecurity expert. And then you have to factor in the benefits. And then, and they're not working 24/7. Of course, we don't want them to work 24/7, right? There's got to be some sort of balance. But with this, you'll have that around the clock.
Are there a number of companies out there that do this now?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes. There's, I was at a conference last month, and I would say 90% of the folks out there are these security operations centers. So you're gonna have to weed out which ones, that.
There's a trust issue I'm struggling with.
Municipalities are there certain ones that are?
Yes, there's the Texas DIR, which is the Texas Department of Information Resources. That is the assigned state of Texas technology department. So we would look at a vendor on their list. That's been approved. They work on a state level, federal level.
Vetted backgrounds, everything.
Unfortunately, that as you mentioned, that industry is growing, and it's growing because there's just a huge need for it. Because unfortunately, that it's the Wild West out there, particularly as we've seen national scale activities that are reaching down into the local level, right? And so sadly, there's not a day that goes by that we don't see where a city's been hacked or it's got major disruptive elements. Del Rio, for instance, last year was shut down for multiple months because they got hacked within their utility billing infrastructure. And so, and not to say this is going to prevent something like that 100%, but it absolutely. These are the kind of things that keep Charlie and I up at night every time you read one of those stories. And so, it's a strong positive step in the right direction to help us be better protected.
Right.
Because
And
these companies are only as good as their worst employee, and what happens if you get somebody that's
Sure, they have to be
disgruntled?
bonded, right? Like some bonded.
Yeah,
and all
Oh,
that.
there's all kinds
There's a
of
strong
insurance
vetting
and.
process. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And I would say on the first item, I foresee that it's not required now, but I foresee that being required in order for us to even purchase cybersecurity insurance. Gone are the days where cybersecurity insurance companies are knocking on your door and saying, hey, buy our insurance. Now they're like, oh, please don't buy our insurance. We don't
Right.
want to be in the business.
And if
because
you do,
it's been-
you have to do.
You have to do X,
all
Y,
these
and
things,
Z.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
Be happy to answer any more questions you may have.
Do you usually do those? Are those usually done on an annual basis, or is it a multi-year contract that's usually done?
The operations center, it would be every year. It would be reoccurring every year.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, and it will be a replacement of having an internal security operations center.
what's the estimated cost for that?
I've seen it range from $50,000 to $75,000, but again, when you look at how much it would cost to bring on an employee
Yeah.
at that caliber, with those skills.
Yeah.
The assessment, we would not anticipate having to necessarily be an
Right.
annual.
That would
yeah,
be a
right.
But the
one-time
contract
thing,
would be.
The contract,
annual
thank you.
renewal.
That's
but
correct.
the other would be ongoing.
Right.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kirby.
Thanks, Charlie.
All you.
Okay, I wasn't sure, my name wasn't on this one. All right, so we did want to bring to your attention our existing school resource officer program, and then some discussions we have been in with KISD in regards to modifications to that program. So as you may recall, just this last year, I think, we actually moved from one officer that was a student resource officer at Tybee High School to two officers, one being primarily at the high school and then one at the middle school. They have approached the city about partnering with them to potentially look at 2 additional officers within that program to be able to assist with elementary, the local elementaries. And so they would likely split time between 2 elementaries, or really the 2 of them would split time between 4 elementaries, all of Carville ISD. And be able to kind of rotate through there. So we're still working through exactly what that looks like, but it is a cost. The existing program is a cost sharing program, and we share. It's a 5-6, 1-6 split based off of the time that they're spending on those campuses throughout the year.
Define the split.
They pay 5/6, we pay 1/6. That has traditionally been basically salaries and benefits only. We're taking a little bit more comprehensive look at it now that the program has grown, because it would require the likelihood for us to make sure they're properly outfitted and equipment and everything else. And so
Do they have what on the months that school is not going on, what happens?
So we do utilize those folks for other operational components, particularly during the summer. As you all know, our population increases significantly
Yeah.
because of tourism
Okay.
and other aspects, and so
And that's part of the 1/6 idea?
That's right, yeah.
Well, the only thing I'd like to add to this
Yeah.
is, I don't see that adding
Do you need
2
that?
additional officers to rotate between elementary schools would be effective in light of what happened in Uvalde, and I would want to make the recommendation that there be a law enforcement presence at every elementary school.
Understand those comments. We're in active conversations with KISD, and we've had a 100% increase this year, and now we've got
Yeah.
another 100% increase in that program, and so.
And we're taking 1/6 on, so they really are taking the larger.
brunt.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and to be quite honest, some
I
of it's
don't
a
disagree
staffing
with you, though.
component.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest,
Right.
bringing on
They're bringing
two
on-
additional, it's going to be a challenge from a staffing perspective, just period. And so, it may be growing towards that, I guess, is what I'm saying. So, it's not all fleshed out. We just wanted to let y'all know we are closely looking at this. There is a cost sharing component that will be a component of your general fund budget, but just wanted to let y'all know that we're having these conversations very aggressively this summer. So, because they are intending when they move into the new fiscal
Good.
year that those positions are put into place.
Wish we didn't have to.
Would Chief,
Unfortunately, that's right.
would you have any comments on adding the 2 and doing them part-time as opposed to having full-time?
Well, I think adding 2 at this juncture would be our prudent move. Covering those schools 50% of the time is definitely better than 0% of the time, which is where we are right now.
Yeah.
Is it ideal? Probably not, but we have a lot of operational needs, even outside the schools, that we need to be addressing at the same time. So trying to balance those two needs is kind of the approach we're taking here.
And you could staff that if necessary.
We're gonna try.
Yeah, it would,
staff members,
yes, we would have to hire in. Obviously, we wouldn't want to hire a brand-new officer and place them into the
Right.
schools, so we would have to backfill a position because we'd want to put an experienced officer into the schools for that position.
Did you say you would or would not?
Would not hire in a brand-new officer into that position.
Is hiring a retired police person for a half a day, is that anything
Are they on a
that?
different pay scale? I mean, speak to that, are they just in the general pay scale with the same way that the entire force is?
Yes.
Right now, they're in the general pay scale.
General pay scale, okay.
Well, do we know if they're doing anything over the summer to better protect our school.
Campuses
Yeah.
hardening.
Yes.
So last week before last, I met with Dr. Faust and Wade Ivy, as well as Chris Lalonde from the Sheriff's Department. We're having conversations in regards to school safety. We're tracing our steps on some things that have already been put into place to ensure that we're following through on those, as well as tabletop exercises in the near future to work through our reunification plan, what that looks like, what needs we need to cover with that, and how realistic some of the portions of that plan are. I know they're taking a very serious approach to it this summer and really looking at the full impact of the school. There's volleyball camp going on at the high school. We've had officers through there pretty regularly throughout the day. One of those officers did kind of a security check, found several doors open, talked to Wade Ivy, and they immediately got into correction mode with that, getting maintenance involved and getting those things done. So I know they're very proactive in trying to address those issues.
Because I know after touring the middle school, there ain't nobody getting in that school unless it's by human error, propping doors open, stuff like that. Otherwise, there's one way in and one way out, and you never make it past the foyer. So on some of these schools that are 40 years old, what are they doing to educate their staff to?
And there have been some improvements. I know in the last bond program, a portion of those proceeds were dedicated to hardening some of the elementary and older campuses.
Things like that.
Because they weren't built to, some of the more modern standards like the middle school is.
Yeah.
But again, you make a great point. A lot of it is the operational piece.
right.
And that just takes consistent diligence, right? And so that we are very actively engaged, as Chief mentioned, with their staff to make sure that we're monitoring those pieces.
Well, and I mentioned this to Chief, but and this is an aside, but just having that presence there, that last week of school when I was dropping my kids off.
Yeah.
And just having the high fives to the kids as they went in the building, cause they were, it touches my heart. I mean, I know that physically,
Yeah.
it was really important and very appreciated.
Well, and I think even
Reassuring.
on a half day with an officer
Yeah.
there, that officer.
They can be checking
Will
and they
be
can be.
checking on things and teachers are trying to teach. And that will help with just a remembrance, I need to do this, we need to do that kind of thing. So,
That's good.
as you said, better than nothing, much better
start.
than nothing at all.
Definitely creates a more front-of-mind environment
Yeah.
when you have a police officer in the building.
So more to come on that. We just want to let y'all know that we are having those conversations.
Thank you.
And we're
Fantastic.
anticipating a budget impact for both us and KISD.
I think I got this slide in here twice somehow. Oh, it's just a little different. Okay, so, did we do this slide? No, we didn't. Okay,
talked a
sorry.
little bit.
I feel like I got off in the weeds on asset
Well,
replacement
because I
earlier.
got you there, sorry.
Yeah, that's what it was. Okay, so. Yeah, so again, we talked through this a little bit, but one thing we didn't talk about, and not to confuse it even more, but the 750,000 looks like a big number compared to the 440. However, keep in mind that when we merged golf into the general fund, they also have assets that we're bringing over. So their revenue comes with them, their expenses come with them, as do their assets. And so for consistency, we're taking their assets, we want that to now be part of general fund assets. So there really is a net, I think I said 166,000 net difference
Okay.
if you take the golf out. So that's about $144,000.
So no longer the transfer and.
Right, well, so we're not transferring money to golf
into-
anymore.
Right.
Yeah, so it's just cleaning everything
Yeah.
up. So it looks like, you have a $320,000 difference there, but you have to take into account the additional revenues that we're bringing into the general
Yeah.
fund. So that does make up a little bit of the difference. So if you take that out, golf wasn't there, I would be saying we're asking for 166,000 more.
Just trying to give you apples to apples.
Just, yes,
comparison.
yes, because it looks big when
looks
you do it
big,
like
yeah.
that.
But basically, it's just golf.
Well, it's golf
Plus
plus 166,000.
Okay.
And we've talked, over prior meetings about the need, for the asset replacement fund is, well, for example, when we looked at vehicle replacements for this coming up year in '23, we finally drew a line at everything older than 2007. So if that tells you what we're replacing, we're not replacing things that are not in need of replacement.
So you're saying that if we transferred 440, what we would be saying for this year backing out golf would be about 500, 506, I mean.
612, 605, what'd you say?
I just
166.
I added 166 and 440, is that?
No, so this 440 is what we've done to date.
Ah,
So I'm looking at the 750 proposed
uh-huh.
and the 440, so the difference between the two of those,
Proposed year end, estimated year end, is that what that is?
no,
These
so
are
the
original
750, so the middle section here where it says annual budgeted transfers,
Gotcha.
okay, we'll move through that. Fiscal year 22, we transferred this year $440,000. For 23, we're proposing 750. But of that 750, golf is, right, the 166 is the net.
Right.
We're asking for 166,000 more than the 140,000, 440.
So remember that we will come back to you guys like we did last year and really talking through, you know, where we're at on the long range forecasting for general asset replacement, because we do have these vehicles have lifespans, right? And we've done the departments, Julie and Guillermo and others have done a tremendous job in really being able to be realistic about what those lifespans are, what maintenance costs are on different vehicles, which ones are needing replacement. But the reality is, we need to continue to be stronger about building this savings account, because we have outgoing needs in those out years that we're not at a level where we should be as far as annual savings that are being allocated to this asset class. We are behind and we're having to play catch up.
What would be a good number for us?
1.5 million,
1.5.
roughly. If I were to give you a swag number, we should be at about $1.5 million every year.
And we're gonna come back to you in a workshop probably after this budget year with a lot more future forecasting that we've worked through as far as looking at individual items that we need to be replacing and what that's gonna look like. And we talked in retreat about the
schedule.
fire trucks coming up. Exactly, creating a schedule, maybe looking at 10 years, but really honing in on 5. And actually using that as a plug number as we get started with our budget, instead of it being an afterthought of, okay, we think we
Hopefully we
can
can
do
do that.
this. Exactly. So just taking a little bit different approach to it going into next fiscal year.
But bottom line is, we can't bank on surplus end of
Right.
year funds just because we maybe had a good year on sales
That's what
tax,
we
or maybe had a good year on EMS revenues, and being able to put that away. We're past that
Exactly.
point. We relied on that too many years, and unfortunately, you know, that this fund got depleted.
It bit us.
It did.
So I gave you just a little bit of information, and again, we'll talk a lot more about this later, but I wanted to let you know this, so this slide here on page 29 is an update of where we are for fiscal year 22. So telling you right now, everything on here that's in yellow, just to give you an idea of supply issues that we're having, those were all ordered as soon as the budget was approved.
And we don't have them yet?
And we don't have them if they're in yellow. So it's just letting you know the paver, the ambulance, some IT components, a generator we ordered for the streets building, and lease vehicles. We haven't received any of that. And some
Not
of them
from,
aren't
like,
even being made.
October 1.
October 1. So as soon as you guys gave the stamp in
Wow.
September, we ordered them. So, we still don't have those yet. So if that gives you just kind of an idea of we need to be, you know, more proactive in talking about some pre-order situations given current supply. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but just want to give you an update of where we are now, on that. And then right down here in the pink, it does show that 144,000, is a piece of that 750, so that's coming over. So those are existing leases in golf that we'll have to pay for. And those are things like their mowing equipment, their golf carts that we
Okay.
have them on a lease, and then there's a tractor, and then the irrigation controller that we haven't received yet, that's part of those leases as
That
well.
makes more sense.
So those came into that, and so just so that we're clear on the 750,
Yeah.
part of that does assume that merger from golf.
Do we have any updates besides it's been ordered and it's pending?
Some of them aren't even being made yet.
Okay, so this is just something that we talked about at retreat, why we need to be looking a year or more in advance.
Correct.
Of our assets and
Right.
what we're probably replacing.
Yeah, we've got to start looking sooner. And
Great segue to the next slide.
yeah, so this is what we're proposing for fiscal year 23, and we don't have to go through all the little details, but this does break it out by department, starting with where we're estimating that we'll be at the beginning as far as fund balance, how much money we have to use for these things. the budgeted transfer in, the little pieces of revenue that come from some other areas, and then taking out the existing leases that are already in queue. So either we're already paying for those because they started in 21, or it's other lease components, and then adding golf into that as well. So removing that, then you can see we have proposed purchases and then proposed leases. So they're broken out by category. There wasn't enough room for me to tell you what year these vehicles were that we were replacing, because that would have been kind of a nice thing to know. We can give you that later, but I can tell you they're 2007 or older. They're old.
So we're making a jump of a little over 200,000 in bringing up that balance, because it looks like if we have a starting balance of 827 and an ending balance of 662. So we're trying to
Ease it up.
build it up.
Trying to ease it up because, and like I said, we're gonna know a lot more, once we dig into that 10-year, and Guillermo and I and Shannon and Trina and a multitude of people have been looking at that.
Yeah.
To kind of see what's this look like 10 years out, and what does that transfer
So
need to be every year.
over time, we
Over
want to
time.
see 1.5 right as of now, sitting in that top line.
That's right. That's right.
After, yes.
On an annual
We
basis,
build it,
that's
we start
going in.
building it
Yeah.
up, like
It's kind of like we've been building up on street maintenance, right?
Yeah.
And just getting that to a level where
getting into
we're,
a sustainable.
that's
Right.
right, that's right.
And right now, we're just, doing it with year-end transfers when we can, and then
Right,
doing it within
right.
the budget process.
Right.
Now, going back to what I just said, just to make sure, is this list, does this consist of things that we are saying we would need within this next fiscal year?
Yes.
Or is this list also looking ahead and saying it's not
No.
yet?
No, and so one of the conversations that actually EA and Chief and I have been having is, so we're having an extreme shortage when it comes to chassis for ambulances, believe it or not. So we are scheduled to purchase an ambulance in fiscal year 23. But we're probably going to be coming to you and saying, if we can pre-order this chassis, tying
Like
up
this
some of the,
year?
fund balance that we have now just because of encumbrances, it could be a year and a half before we get it. And so if we wait, there's an ordering window that we have to hit, so you can only order on X days, and I don't know
Are we
exactly
still,
how that works,
we
but,
still counting it in next year's budget?
well, we would,
Take it out of the fund balance.
Yeah.
it would come, yeah, it would just be an additional but it would be kind of complicated, because it would have to be put in this year as an amendment.
Yeah.
However, it would have to be rebudgeted in 23, because we know we're not gonna get it. So it would be a pre-order, there would be no money that moved. It would just be because we haven't budgeted for that item.
So we would encumber it.
So we just
would
order
encumber
it
that
earlier
balance,
for
order
That's
it
right.
early, but
Okay.
realize we probably won't actually receive it until
Okay.
we hope
We
next
hope
fiscal year.
next fiscal year.
Okay.
So, and then we would order the box separately, because those don't seem to be the problem.
But we're in a scenario right now where if we don't get in line, you won't see it till
Right.
2025.
So we can expect y'all to come between now
Right.
and October with those kinds of requests.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly, just trying to get a little bit ahead, as we know there's not gonna be any money moving.
Yeah.
But if we know also, if we don't get some orders in, we're never gonna get this stuff.
Okay.
Well,
So-
let me just clarify too,
Yes.
for the things that were ordered, that money's left the city already? Is
No,
that-
No.
No, it has not.
no,
not-
so we don't pay for anything until we have it in our hand and we can see it.
So we encumber that balance, so we know that,
Right.
we will need it when
accounted
that, but
for.
we don't,
Right,
until we
you're saying
receive
it's
the
already
vehicle.
designated.
Spoken
yes.
for.
Right, that's what I wanted to
Yeah,
make sure.
yeah, it's encumbered, so it shows, there's an actual PO in there.
That's right.
It's not going anywhere, but we don't actually pay for those items until we
Right.
receive them. Now, one small exception, and I didn't talk about this on the prior slide, but good news is we have purchased 4 police vehicles that actually, we have, I'm gonna say received, they're actually at the safety company being upfitted. So that's good news, that we're actually gonna get those maybe in the next few months, because
Yeah.
Dana Safety is also on a supply problem. So they're not here, they're in Round Rock, but they are in our possession, I guess, but now being upfitted.
They're in the state, at least.
They are here.
They're 2 hours away.
2 hours away, but they're in the state.
They are.
Do we have, we, 2007 is the decision. Do we have much beyond 2007?
We've done a really good job about, in this last few years, via council
Bringing in.
direction on, as you recall, we had several that were late nineties vehicles, even early nineties vehicles, and some early
seatbelts.
2000s. They had some safety issues were our predominant concern, and so we prioritized those, and so we're doing a lot
in
better on
pretty
that
good,
front. Yeah, particularly on the
reasonable
safety
shape.
front, that's
Okay.
right, yeah. We've got employees that are driving around now in vehicles that have airbags, have seatbelts, have anti-lock brakes.
Maybe air
So we've made some significant strides on that front.
Good.
And remember what our timeline is that like 10, 15 years that we replace most of those?
Depends on
It depends on the vehicle, so obviously police vehicles are gonna replace sooner because they have more miles.
Yeah.
So vehicles like an admin
More
vehicle
wear
or
and
something
tear.
like that.
Guillermo has a whole like
Yeah.
replacement schedule, doesn't
Yeah.
he?
We
Yeah.
do.
Got
We have
much more
every vehicle
sophisticated,
lined out over the years as far as how long we think
Right.
we should be able to keep that vehicle. So some of these leases, for example, when the lease is up, we have the option to buy that out. If it's a 5-year lease and it's a low mileage vehicle
Yeah.
that we don't use much, then we may not have a payment on that vehicle for 3-4 years before we decide it needs to be replaced. But some of the other ones that are heavier used, then obviously we're turning those over more.
A lot of our fire and EMS vehicles, I believe they're on a 7-year cycle, is that right, chief? And then, but as a kind of added complication to that, ambulances, for instance, we replace the chassis, but we keep the box. And so we may just add the box onto a new chassis.
So, any other asset replacement questions? I know it's a lot because of supply really right now, so I completely expect to be rebudgeting for some of these for 23. Fingers crossed we get a few of them.
So not intending to go into great detail here, but we did talk a little bit about one of your other savings accounts, so to speak, and that's the community investment program. A lot of needs that have been identified within there. We bring it up today only because I'm just indicating to you that we are budgeting a transfer to that plan from the general fund. But as you know, these won't be any surprises to you. We've talked about Callaway Theater roof repair. It's at the end of its useful life. The KPD roof, which is at the end of its useful life. We've got numerous public park restrooms that need overhauls. We've talked about Kerrville Shriner Park. We've talked about the golf greens getting close to their end of their useful life, as well as bathroom renovations. We do have some degree of bathroom renovations we are trying to do internally at that facility. The city garage really is not operational.
I thought we already
Yeah.
addressed that.
Can you touch
It's
on that?
Address which one?
the operation. My thought was that it had been brought up to structurally being sound, but we still hadn't worked that if we wanted to do the aesthetics and on the outside.
For which facility? I'm sorry.
For the
garage?
So we're having two different, yes.
Oh, not the parking garage. You're talking about.
Our
This
garage.
is,
Our
this is the
mechanic.
actual
Sorry.
mechanic facility.
Right.
So
Gotcha.
right now,
Gotcha.
that
I
is.
was like, wait, we just did that.
No,
Okay. All right.
unfortunately, that's a facility where
Yes.
we can
Sorry.
only, for instance, our fire trucks, we really they have to
Right.
operate on those out in the parking lot.
Right.
And
Okay.
so we're looking at a lot of options there right now, but it's on their radar as far as what bringing options to you all long term, because it's not functional. Aquatics and Olympic Pool, we've talked about that. That is also a 60-year-old facility that's ending the near its useful life, and then ongoing IT, cyber security, and system support elements. And really, what comes out of some of those assessments that we talked about earlier, as far as actual physical infrastructure that may be required ongoing. So a lot of needs there. A $200,000 transfer doesn't get it done, but we're just kind of letting you know what that universe looks like. So.
Kind of just as a high-level summary here, so as of June 12th, we just double-checked everything. So we're estimating right now that revenues exceed expenses by $522,000.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
Your expenditures.
Expenses
I
exceed
liked it-
revenues.
I liked the way you said it.
Sorry, I would like it that way too. No, so we're out of balance by $522,000 as of June 12th. We work on this every day, so that number may be a little bit different today. We're constantly monitoring our larger revenue sources to see, what do we think that's gonna end at? Sales tax, EMS, solid waste, some of our big guys, and then of course property tax that we don't know right now, so we're just monitoring that. Franchise fees, all of those things, we're just looking at them on a month-to-month, trying to develop some trends to make sure we're estimating correctly for fiscal year 23, and then continuing to just review expenses to make sure, did we miss anything that we need to add? Is there anything that, we added that we need to reduce? Or, just really monitoring that and
What
digging in.
assumption for property tax are you using there?
For property tax?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, this is expense side. Never mind.
Oh, okay,
No,
sorry.
estimate versus- yeah. Like, what assumptions are in there on
So,
that part?
So for these here, obviously sales tax and property tax, the way that we talked about them. EMS is one that we're digging into really deep because we're really performing much better than budget for fiscal year 22. However, you have to remember that in 2021 and 22 were all budgeted exactly the same. And that was because back in 2020, we actually missed EMS budget, but then we had COVID impact, and we didn't really know what the impacts were that were gonna be, so those revenues have just stayed flat. So Chief and I have been really digging into EMS to see where do we think our projections are gonna be this year. Also, we're gonna be allowed by the state, is that correct? An increase, is that who allows it, Chief? The rate increase?
It's just our.
Okay, so a rate increase on certain components of EMS revenue that we're trying to factor in on their volume. So just really looking at a lot of pieces, and that's a big dollar revenue for us. So we want to make sure we don't over or under estimate that.
What
So
level of concern should we have that we spent $500,000 more than we?
Well, my question was, can you sleep at night with this?
where we
Yeah,
are right
you have to
now,
get to
yes,
zero.
this is not a surprise. So typically when we come in June with so many factors unknown, we're anywhere from 300 to 700 out of balance. It just depends on, what factors are still out there, what things we need to hone in on. Are some things gonna come back better than we expected on the revenue side? How conservative were we the first time? And those kind of things. So it's a daily process, like we're touching the general fund budget every day.
It's not atypical for us to be at this level of imbalance,
Yeah, it seems like every year
but
it's
Does it ever
like this.
balance out?
Yeah, we
it
have
does.
to.
It has
by,
to.
by law. When I present it, when I drop it in the city secretary's office on August 1st,
It'll be
it
zero.
100% will be balanced. But we just want to let you all know
Today.
where we're at operationally with what's been proposed, where we're at with revenue projections, and certainly more than anything, get input from you all if there are things that we need to be looking at on either one of those sides.
I don't understand any of that, but we'll talk about it.
Okay.
It's gonna be zero.
Anything,
Yeah.
council?
Whatever we have to do, it'll be
Yeah.
zero.
This is
No, I mean, you
speculative.
filed one last year that was zero. It was balanced.
Yes.
Yes.
As we operated, it's not in balance.
That's right.
Which means either the assumptions were off or the expenses
Well,
were higher.
this
than
is looking
anticipated.
at proposed 23.
Right.
So this is looking at next year's
Thank
budget.
you.
Sorry.
That answers the question.
That opened up
Yeah.
my
Oh, yeah,
ears
yeah,
a little
yeah,
bit.
yeah.
Oh, that's
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
No, this is
Okay.
looking at
Yeah.
proposed
No, no, no.
23.
No, that's not where
We're
we
not
are
talking
now.
about fiscal year 22 budget.
Correct.
No, 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 no.
Gosh,
So,
No, this
That's
is
okay,
Joe.
This
if I
is
didn't have any more
proposed
checks than I
budget.
had money, I'd be in problem.
no.
A year from
Yeah.
now,
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
so saying, if
Thank
we had to present the budget right now, this is where we are. But we still have a lot of stuff to work through.
And we're just all sitting here going, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
We'll get it.
We're wondering why it
Back
wasn't.
to zero, don't you worry.
Don't worry about
sleep
that. Don't worry your pretty little head about that.
It's $500,000.
Yeah, this is not your finance update for this fiscal year.
Yeah.
This is proposed.
I'll bring you that in a couple weeks.
okay, Brenda, comments, questions?
No, I just have to tell you, I mean, we're all laughing about this, but last time, when I first went through this, I had the same issue. It's like, wait, we're writing more checks than we've got money.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, that's probably something I said in 1990 as well.
Anything else, Joe?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
y'all very much. Welcome.
No,
And
thank you.
Roman? All
Appreciate
right.
And if you do have questions or, anything in particular, we're happy to share that.
Thank you all.
You bet.
Yes.
You bet. So just a reminder, calendar-wise, we'll be coming back to you all on July 19th, and that we will be talking primarily about the water fund, the community improvement plan. We'll probably circle back a little bit in regards to the asset replacement, just given the conversation today, and then all of the other smaller funds, so hotel, motel, and library memorial, and all the smaller functional funds. So that will be predominantly circled around water.
And if you have any questions on the fee schedule draft, let us know. We're still working through some things on that, and water is still to come.
and what's our workshop next week gonna be?
No workshop
Nothing
next week.
No workshop.
Really?
Really?
No workshop next week.
These are yours.
Today was next week.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Wait, what?
All right,
We
at
normally do a Tuesday.
12:01, we will close the workshop. Thank you all.
Not
Have a
Tuesday
good
after.
afternoon.
So close to getting y'all out of here right before noon.